After E3 2019, I thought for a while about what topics I could talk about that aren't discussed that often. What are the core elements and trends that this year's E3 sent out into the world of gaming? This question in of itself bears a topic. Does E3 slowly lose its relevancy for the industry? Sony, which is leading the console market right now, especially in my country, was not even there. The big publishers and even console companies also tend to more and more announce their games and consoles during their own events throughout the year. Of course, Sony's absence has multiple reasons. One might be that a new console generation is not far away anymore, and Microsoft just announced Project Scarlet. Announced is, in my opinion, a too strong word here. They just teased it, but that's also not the topic I want to cover. Watching the press conferences and looking upon the main titles that everyone talks about, I noticed several little similarities, and I want to focus on two of them: sequels and franchises and game settings. After that, a few comments on what I found interesting. In case you find the next section boring or don't like my rambling, just skip ahead. The game announcement that gave me the final impression for sequels was the last game in the last conference I've seen. Let's call it The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2. Going through the list of big games of E3, we find Halo Infinite, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Watch Dogs 3, Doom Eternal, Gears 5, Borderlands 3, Luigi's Mansion 3, Cyberpunk 2077, Elden Ring, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, The Outer Worlds, and maybe some more. Most of them are part of a franchise or even sequels, and if not, they will probably be, and almost all of them are also connected through their setting. We'll come to this later. I rambled about this in my strange top 3 games of 2018 video already, which is less top list and more review and discussion. In my opinion, one of my best videos. It has a long section about iteration in film and games, and the list of the highest grossing films of all time reflects this perfectly. All except 2 films are franchises or even sequels. This trend exists for a long time in gaming too. Sequels and franchises are not bad by definition. Especially in game development, iteration is needed. Innovation alone leads nowhere without iteration. However, iteration alone leads nowhere if innovation is completely ignored. In an ideal scenario, you have to find a balance. That's true for the medium film and also for the medium game, but it often feels that there is no good balance for a long time now. As mentioned, even Nintendo announced a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, which felt quite unusual for this franchise, considering how often Zelda main titles are connected but often have a very different feeling. Think of Majora's Mask or Wind Waker. The trailer, of course, also gave a darker feeling than Breath of the Wild, but it was still a lot of Breath of the Wild in it. And don't get me wrong, I think it still looked interesting. Nintendo stated that it was due to the team having so many ideas for DLCs that they wanted to make it into its own game, but it fits the tendency I noticed. Luckily, there are still games in the list that go against this observation, like Elden Ring or The Outer Worlds. I would even say Cyberpunk 2077 is an exception, even though it is part of a franchise and could also get sequels in the future. Same with Elden Ring or Outer Worlds. But isn't it strange? When a game or franchise was once popular and you don't hear about it for some years or decades, then gamers start asking for a remake, a sequel, or a game in that franchise all by themselves. You could make the argument it's hard to ask for something that you don't know, but wouldn't it be strange if people would ask for Citizen Kane 2 or The Seventh Samurai, the prequel? The idea of sequels and prequels have become incredibly popular in our time, and even though I'm aware of that, I sometimes also feel the urge. Wouldn't it be great if there was more of it? Tolkien-related media is a great example for me. In my opinion, companies pushed and marketed for exactly that over the last 5 decades in film, and later video games as an iterative medium adapted. But we also are often strongly connected to media ourselves. In my imagination, far stronger than people, for example, were in the 60s. Today, we consume more media than ever, and it's marketed towards our emotions. Of course, we want to see more of a series, a film, a comic, a book, a game, or whatever that we love. It also helps when governments around the world make copyright laws to protect creators' works for 75 to probably 150 years before they can become public domain, which is ridiculous in my opinion. The law is exactly what a lot of media companies want. Build and own a franchise, make it popular, iterate and have access to it as long as possible, making as much money as possible until people are sick of it. Take a break for a decade, repeat, minus the first point. And when owners die, their children and grandchildren can continue to profit from this work, using this cycle. When the debate about the new copyright directive in Europe and especially Germany was happening, some portrayed the current situation as incredibly bad for copyright owners. Nobody talked about the issue of media not becoming public domain, because owners in that regard are in reality overprotected. There are memes out there using pictures from, for example, Star Wars on the internet. Star Wars came out 42 years ago. It's actually ancient, but it will go public domain 2072. The assumption is quite reasonable that I will barely live long enough to actually see this day, and Star Wars was already an old movie when I was born. During the time to 2072, I will probably see about 8 more Star Wars movies coming up. At least that's the planned number we know about today. There could be even more movies depending on how well they are received. It's crazy. And here's also another interesting observation. As mentioned, films, games, etc. are marketed with emotion in mind. Hype must be generated. If people mark a release in their calendar and take some days off, marketing went right. At the same time, companies complain a lot about shitstorms and backlash, but I see a strong correlation. You cater towards people's emotions and then wonder what happens if you don't deliver. Of course they will react emotionally and not rationally. If you market to people on a very rational level, this would happen less, but at the same time you would also not generate that much hype. I also think it's easier to create hype for something that you already know. It can also be a person involved. Kojima, Miyazaki, etc. are good examples. And here we are again at franchises and sequels. What I learned over time, there are talented people with good and new ideas out there. Give them a chance too. Just as an exaggeration, when the media industry would suddenly stop after one sequel in a franchise and then create something totally new, we still would have good films to watch and good games to play, and it would definitely help variety and the art itself. Luckily, some people are doing this already. Certain big developers, for example Miyazaki and his teams, seem to do exactly that right now, but of course it took them a while, and also they had to deliver to be allowed to do so on the big stage. There are also some indie game companies or personalities that do this too. Lucas Pope, who made for example Papers, Please and Return of the Obra Dinn, comes to my mind. When it comes to games, you can also observe that successful franchises, sequels, or even successful new games can have an impact on some creative decisions in the industry. Suddenly, we have more Dota auto chess games than we have time to play. This led over time to certain game styles and mechanics becoming more and more popular. We see sandbox open world games in AAAs a lot, and also an RPGification where a lot of classical RPG mechanics make it into all kinds of games because we are so used to certain progression systems, but that's a topic for another video. However, if we look at the list above, we also see similarities in settings for the most part. Let's call it something like end time, dystopian future, or let's say pessimistic future. End time is, by the way, a very cool word in my opinion. In German, and I say it a bit slower, it's Endzeit. So basically the same word and has phonetically a cool sound in my opinion. However, if we go again through the list, Halo Infinite, epic story in that entire worlds can be destroyed, pretty apocalyptic. Final Fantasy VII Remake, dystopian steampunk world with some slight cyberpunk influences, and spoiler, it has to do with the end of the world. Watch Dogs 3, dystopian England. Doom Eternal, literally the apocalypse. Gears 5, also pretty end time if you ask me. Borderlands 3, at least its predecessors played in this post-apocalyptic world. Luigi's Mansion 3, that's the only one that does not fit. Cyberpunk 2077. The genre Cyberpunk is by definition dystopic and it plays in the future. Elden Ring. It will have some similarities to Souls, which also plays at the end of an age in a fading world. Pretty end-side again. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. While Lucas is from a time that was more optimistic about the future, the last iterations and knowing there will be more sequels indicates an endless galactic war and no peace for this universe ever. So Star Wars has also become quite pessimistic or even nihilistic about the future. Still, we have common motives in the game. Suppression, because the protagonist is a Jedi and he will be hunted by the evil galactic empire, which will be destroyed much later and not by the protagonist. He also joins a rebellion, which is also a common motive in dystopic settings. The Outer Worlds, well, it's reminiscent of Fallout, so a post-apocalyptic setting again. The question is why. In the Star Wars part I already mentioned that it may have to do with all the sequels. For me, Luke Skywalker defeated the Empire and built a foundation for peace in the galaxy. The desire to make more stories, though, created the necessity of more conflicts. From the remaining forces of the Empire to reviving the antagonist, we can find everything in the old expanded universe and even in the cinematic sequels. And if this conflict is solved, there will be new conflicts created for it. I think the strong desire of sequels pushes stories to not end and always leave room for more, which can lead into a dystopic setting over time in stories of epic scale, because there is never a chance of having peace, and if you want to surpass your last epic story, the next one needs to be even more epic. And war after war after war is just hell. Characters have to die and suffer, worlds have to be destroyed. That's why I like the Star Trek The Next Generation series so much. Sometimes they just tell a small story that ends. My beloved Lord of the Rings has also an end-time setting, but luckily Tolkien decided against writing a sequel, so it just ends and the Fourth Age can have peace. But I also see another reason why this setting is so popular. It's probably also our time. Computer technology advances more and more, and people feel how in a worst-case scenario a massive amount of jobs will vanish over time, because now a machine will do it, and some may not be replaced by newly created jobs. That's a terrifying thought. We saw it when the steam machines did the same to people during the industrialization. In addition, the climate change is bad news for future generations, and governments around the world move very slowly and sometimes not at all, while we are running out of time. Considering this, it makes sense that we process our worries about the future in our media, and I would even argue that is also what they and art are there for. Some people may be sick of this setting, but it makes sense in the context of our time. In contrast, I can see settings become popular again that are more positive, just as a place to flee to, or when the news become better again, but this will take some time. As promised, here's some thoughts about things that I found interesting during E3. Actually, this one was announced before E3. During the Stadia Connect, they announced yet another sequel, this time of a famous but old game series, Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian Studios. I have a lot of good memories of Dungeons and Dragons and also Baldur's Gate, and I really liked Larian's Divinity Original Sin games. It looks like a passion project for them, and in this context I'm confident that they will deliver a good game. Original Sin 2 is a long game too, so they have proved already that they are capable of making a game of that scale. What concerns me a bit is the sudden massive expansion of the studio. They tripled their size, so in theory, this could be a different studio that we've known. They also teased very high production values. That's a huge investment, so we will see what this means in the future. Still, the core of the studio remains. I was also surprised by Watch Dogs Legion. Sounds really ambitious, and maybe it's inspired by the Nemesis system from Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. Of course, there it's used differently, but it also basically generates a ton of characters that can even reference events from the past and so on. There are definitely similarities on the design and tech level. So I believe this has potential and could also bring some innovation. Maybe this is something like the narrative Lego Ken Levine, the creator of BioShock, talked about in the past. I actually expected his game to show up somewhere too this E3, but it didn't happen. Cyberpunk 2077. What can I say? I like sci-fi, I like Cyberpunk, and Witcher 3 was amazing, so I'm interested. I like the Matrix trilogy and Keanu Reeves too. I think I can blend out that he plays a major character in the game, but I can see some people having trouble with it. So no clue if this is a good decision or not, but for now it worked out for them PR-wise. Here a little question for my viewers. This scene here, I know it from an anime. I think it's a reference and the scene is almost identical, and in my head it's related to Ghost in the Shell, but I could not find the scene. Does anyone know it and can name the anime in the comments? Much appreciated, thanks. Probably no surprise for anyone who knows my channel, but I'm curious about FromSoft's new game Elden Ring 2. However, what concerns me a bit is that it's open world. It depends on what FromSoft's take on open world looks like, but I really like the interconnected, more designed and structured approach of the Souls games, which was open too and transported the illusion of an open world, but actually wasn't. I would call it multilinear or pseudo-open world. I'm not the hugest fan of sandbox open world games and hope they are avoiding this direction and come up with a hybrid. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a weird one for me. Together with the original Deus Ex from 2000, Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time. It depends on mood which one I would put on first place, but I intensely dislike the idea of a remake. I'll probably make a separate video about this at some point. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Final Fantasy VII was a piece of art in my eyes. My Citizen Kane of games, only reached by Deus Ex. It's a critique of society and economy. You don't remake art, and you especially don't cut it into episodes. It always felt like it got victim of what it actually criticizes with all the other things created around it, like the visual impressive but terrible movie. That's also a reason why I'm not the biggest fan of Square Enix anymore. The news of the first part only covering Midgar, which is only like 5 to 10% of the original game, does not fill me with confidence too. Visuals are stunning though, and they integrated a pseudo-ATB system, which I like too. We will see how they expand that. Final Fantasy VII also had the mechanic of equipping certain magical crystal stones called materia and combine certain effects. You could come up with some creative builds and interesting combos, like getting revived when you die while dealing massive damage to enemies. Of course, the system was still simple, but transported an illusion of creativity, which was amazing for 1997, so I hope they have something like this again in the game. Still, I mainly dislike an episodic release. What happens with Part 2 if the combat system is heavily criticized? Does Part 2 get a totally new one? What if the last part is released so late that part 1 feels technically outdated in comparison by then? It would not make this game, which was originally only one game, seem very coherent. My cynic self would say they do this to make fans buy the game multiple times. What strengthens this theory, the first Final Fantasy VII Remake episode will be released before next console generation is available, and it would be no surprise if there will be a version of it for next console generation, the let's call it definitive edition, that people can buy again. Speaking of consoles, I think Stadia, Google's game streaming service, could have a huge impact over time. Input delay is a problem, but if it's constant and the game doesn't need absolute precision, you will get used to the delay. Interestingly, Ubisoft announced that their new Game Pass will be compatible with Stadia. Considering that Stadia Basic will be free for 1080p at 60 frames per second if you buy the games, I would imagine that this means you can play the Ubisoft games directly over Stadia at 1080p for paying $15 a month, and you don't need a $300 to $500 console anymore, which also require a subscription if you want to play online. That's, in my opinion, not a bad deal if you only plan to play through some games just once. Even if you need both subscriptions, it can be worth it. However, I still like owning a game and having physical goods, but I think that could vanish over time. As a PC player, I rarely buy physical games anymore. I, for example, bought Sekiro physically for PC because a friend gifted me a voucher for an electronics store, and guess what? There's only a code in the case, no DVD or Blu-ray anymore. What's with Microsoft's new console, Project Scarlet, is hard to say. A lot of PR talk. The PlayStation 3 was also marketed as a 120 frames per second console in 2005, and we all know how close to reality this was. If they go with ray tracing, which they announced too, and AMD hasn't spoken much about this technology themselves yet, I would be surprised if they can hit 4K 60 FPS with ray tracing activated. It just tanks frame rate so hard. But I assume 4K 60 FPS no ray tracing will be achievable on a big title next generation. I would be shocked if not. 4K 120 frames per second on major titles though won't work if they don't plan to release a very expensive console, and let's not talk about ray tracing here. That's just unrealistic with current technology, and console specs can't change much anymore. Think of dev kits, support, development and production. We are only 17 months away from its release. If we look at the current generation, those consoles also released outdated in comparison to what was possible on PC, so nobody should expect wonders, just a solid product that plays games well enough and better compared to what we have now. Still, it looks like Microsoft is heavily investing into next generation, and Phil Spencer has done a lot to bring Microsoft back on track by acquiring many interesting development studios and even announcing their own game streaming service. Even the new PC launcher for Windows 10 is not bad for a beta version. If you have seen my last video about the ways of Microsoft, it made no sense what Microsoft did in the past if we compare it to what we see now. It looks like an internal struggle and loss of direction, but it seems they are back, at least for next generation. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Next will be more Tolkien related content, maybe another episode of my in detail Lord of the Rings books and films references and differences video series. I made 5 episodes so far, 109 minutes of content, and we are still in the Shire, but we will technically leave it next episode, I assume. The reason why I push this format so much at the moment is that I've done my research until the Hobbits reach Bree, so I have to use this knowledge before I start forgetting things again. It's also a lot of fun making those. If you haven't seen it yet, check my channel or the playlist. There are still many videos, both lore and gaming related, on my mind. No clue what gaming video will be next though. I hinted a few things in this video. Maybe I will experiment a bit with streaming too, but we will see. If you are still listening and liked this video, please check my other content, press a like button and leave a comment, especially if you know the anime reference of that scene from Cyberpunk. In case you want to subscribe and want to be notified when I upload a video, consider pressing the stupid bell. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.